I never thought fixing a ceiling fan could make me so aware of another person. Yet here I was, standing on the stepladder, hands sticky with dust and wires, and feeling every inch of her nearness. She settled onto the arm of the couch just behind me, her skirt brushing the fabric lightly, the faint scent of her perfume drifting upward. "Do you always sweat this much around women?" she asked, voice soft but teasing, like a thread pulled too taut. I froze for half a second, unsure whether to answer honestly or let the words hang between us. My eyes caught hers in the reflection of the ceiling light, warm, patient, knowing, graceful, confident, yet there was a hint of hesitation behind her calm, a trace of vulnerability I hadn't expected. I swallowed. My palms itched to tighten around the fan blade, to hold something solid. Her presence was magnetic, impossible to ignore. Every subtle movement, her fingers brushing the cushion, the faint tilt of her head, seemed to reach through the air straight to me. She shifted slightly, leaning forward without moving her feet, and the closeness was electric. My heart knocked against my ribs as if it wanted to escape. I felt the warmth of her arm almost grazing mine, her hand twitching over the edge of the couch like she wasn't quite ready to touch but couldn't resist. I tried to focus on the task above me, but each brush of her sleeve against the cushion felt intentional, teasing, drawing me into a gravity I hadn't prepared for. Her eyes, amber in the soft lamplight, never left me. I caught the smallest lift of her brow, the almost imperceptible bite of her lower lip. It was subtle, but it ignited a quiet, insistent tension in the room. I could smell the faint hint of coffee she had left on the table, the softness of her perfume mingling with it, a warm, human scent that made my pulse rise without permission. "I'm almost done," I managed to say, trying to steady my voice. My hands shook slightly, not from the height, but from the closeness of her gaze. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. She smiled then, just a small curve of lips, the kind that suggested she knew exactly what she was doing to me. My fingers froze on the screwdriver, and for a long moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the fan and the quiet ticking of the wall clock. Every breath seemed magnified. Then, just as the tension built to a point that made me dizzy, the sound of a door opening echoed through the apartment. Her eyes flicked toward it, and for a heartbeat, everything shifted, the spell broken, yet lingering. She glanced back at me, her smile lingering like a question, unspoken but heavy with promise. I climbed down from the ladder slowly, aware of how every step felt watched, measured, yet thrilling. The air between us crackled. I wanted to ask something, to reach for her hand, but I didn't. I didn't need words. Her gaze said enough. And in that charged silence, I realized something undeniable. Nothing in my life had prepared me for the gravity of being this close to her. I tried to focus on the fan, tightening the last screws, but my mind kept replaying her presence. She was sitting on the couch again, legs crossed, hands folded loosely in her lap, but every subtle motion drew me in. A flick of her fingers, a tilt of her head, the way she exhaled softly when I adjusted the blades above her. I hated how aware I was of her, yet I couldn't stop. She spoke then, almost casually. "You know, I used to be really good at fixing things." Her voice was calm, but the faint wistfulness made me glance at her. There was a history there, unspoken, a quiet loneliness in the way she said it. She had that air of someone who had lived, made mistakes, lost, but still carried herself with grace. Maybe that's why I was drawn to her. She seemed whole, even in her quiet fractures. I cleared my throat. I think I like figuring things out, even if it's just a fan. My voice sounded smaller than I intended. She smiled faintly, the kind that hinted she knew far more than she let on. There was a pause, a subtle hesitation, as if both of us were measuring the distance between propriety and desire. I felt the weight of the unspoken. She was older, experienced, confident in ways I wasn't. And yet, she lingered just close enough that my shoulder brushed against hers when I reached for a tool. Her hand twitched as if she had intended to move it, but hadn't. The briefest contact, and it left a warmth I couldn't shake. I noticed things I wasn't supposed to. The curve of her neck when she tilted her head, The warmth of her breath near my ear as she commented on the fan, the quiet strength in her hands as she rested them in her lap. Every glance felt deliberate, teasing, and terrifying in its subtle insistence. And then there was the tension of the risk. People would notice, whisper, misunderstand. Her age, my youth, the closeness we were slowly allowing ourselves. It was a dangerous line to walk. Yet something about that danger made the moments between us sharper, more alive. She leaned slightly forward to adjust a cushion, and our hands brushed again, so light it could have been accidental. But the way her eyes met mine, steady and unwavering, made me think otherwise. My heart thumped, and I wanted to ask her to reach across the space and close it, but words failed me. Instead, we shared that quiet pause, where nothing was said, yet everything hung between us. I could feel the electricity in the air, the unspoken acknowledgement that something had shifted. She exhaled slowly, eyes softening, a tiny smile tugging at the corner of her lips. And for a moment, I imagined what it would feel like if nothing held us back. Not age, not caution, not the world outside this apartment. The room seemed to shrink, the air thick with possibility. A single touch, a glance, a breath held too long. They had already begun to rewrite the rules between us. And in that suspended moment, I realized I wasn't just fixing a fan. I was discovering a gravity I couldn't resist. The fan was finally steady, humming quietly, but I couldn't focus on that. My eyes kept drifting to her, to the way she shifted on the couch, the faint brush of her hair against her neck. Every subtle movement seemed amplified, pulling me in against my own caution. I think that should do it, I said, stepping down from the ladder. My hands were shaky, not from height, but from the nearness of her presence. She smiled, a small curve of lips that made my chest tighten. You've got a delicate touch, she said, her voice low, almost intimate. Our eyes met, lingering too long, and I felt my heartbeat spike. Then the sound of a phone buzzing on the table made both of us flinch. She glanced at it, and I realized it wasn't hers, it was mine. A text from a friend asking when I'd be home. My stomach dropped. Suddenly, the reality of the world outside this room intruded, and the closeness between us felt exposed, fragile. I silenced the phone, pretending nothing had happened. But the brief interruption left a charge in the air, a reminder that this, what we were doing, was risky. Age, social norms, expectations, they all hovered at the edges of the room like shadows, whispering that we should step back. Yet neither of us moved. She leaned forward slightly, reaching to adjust a stray cushion, and our hands brushed again. This time, the contact lingered longer than it should have. My fingers twitched, wanting to hold hers, and I caught the faintest shiver running through her shoulder. Careful, I murmured, even though my voice sounded hollow. She laughed softly, a breathy sound that made my stomach clench. Careful with what? She asked, her eyes darkening with something unspoken. A challenge or a dare? I couldn't tell. The room contracted around us. My chest pressed forward as she shifted closer, and for a heartbeat, I imagined tilting my head, closing the distance. I could feel the warmth of her body, the subtle scent of her perfume, the way her breath hitched ever so slightly when our shoulders touched. The thought of crossing that line made my pulse thunder in my ears. We froze as if some invisible boundary held us apart. Guilt, hesitation, fear of discovery. Everything screamed that we shouldn't, but every instinct pulled us closer anyway. My hand hovered near hers, trembling, while hers lingered near mine, almost daring me to bridge the gap. The silence stretched, broken only by the quiet hum of the fan. And then she leaned just slightly, the space between us vanishing, her gaze locking on mine. My lips parted as if to speak, but the words never came. Instead, we simply held the proximity, each heartbeat echoing the impossible tension building between us. In that suspended instant, closer than ever before, the room seemed to hold its breath with us. Neither of us moved, yet neither could deny the gravity pulling us toward the inevitable. The world outside could wait. For now, there was only the quiet, unbearable closeness, a suspended moment that felt dangerously, irrevocably alive. The apartment felt smaller than ever, every sound amplified, the soft hum of the fan, the faint creak of the floor, even our own breathing. I stood closer than I had allowed myself before, and for a moment, neither of us moved. The space between us was electric, heavy with everything unspoken, a tension that had been building for hours. She shifted slightly, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear, and my hand itched to follow the motion, to touch her, to feel her warmth. The brush of her skin so close made my pulse jump, my fingers trembling despite myself. I knew I shouldn't, but the restraint had been cracking for a long time, and now it was almost unbearable. I started, voice low, caught between confession and hesitation. I couldn't finish the sentence. Words felt flimsy against the gravity of what I wanted. She watched me with those steady amber eyes, lips parted slightly, the faintest quiver in her jaw betraying her own restraint. I don't know why. I keep finding myself here, I admitted, voice dropping even lower. With you. Her breath hitched, barely audible, and she leaned a fraction closer, so our shoulders touched. Her proximity was intoxicating, every detail amplified. The warmth of her skin, the soft scent of her perfume, the rhythm of her heartbeat echoing against my chest. My hands hovered near her, trembling as I imagined brushing a strand of hair from her face, just daring to close the final inch between us. I shouldn't. She whispered, voice breaking on the edges. Her hand twitched near mine, a ghost of a touch that made my chest ache with want. There was fear in her eyes, caution, yet something else, something that mirrored exactly what I felt. Desire, hesitation, a quiet, consuming longing. Every instinct screamed to bridge the distance, to close the gap, to feel her lips, her warmth. But the world outside this room, the risks, the judgment, the impossibility of it all, pressed against my ribs like a weight. And yet I couldn't step back. Not now. Not with her standing, or leaning, so close that I could feel the faint rise and fall of her breath against my neck. I can't stop thinking about you, I murmured, almost against my will. My hand itched to reach for her, to rest at the curve of her shoulder, to pull her in even closer. Her eyes widened, a flicker of vulnerability, desire, and fear passing through them in a heartbeat. She leaned slightly, almost imperceptibly, so close that the air between us shimmered with possibility. Our lips were inches apart, my pulse hammering, my mind teetering on the edge. And then, a sudden knock on the door shattered the spell. Both of us froze, the tension snapping back into reality. My gaze met hers, and in that charged silence, neither of us moved, the moment dangling, suspended, aching with everything we hadn't yet dared to give. The world could wait. Almost. I was crouched by the fan, checking the final wiring, when she spoke, her voice low, deliberate, pulling me out of the hum of my own thoughts. "There's something I haven't told you," she said, and I froze, screwdriver in hand. Her eyes, usually calm, held a flicker of something unreadable, fear, shame, maybe desire. "What?" I asked, swallowing hard. She shifted on the couch, leaning forward, hands clasped loosely in front of her. "I wasn't completely honest the last time I saw you," she whispered. "About feelings. About why I agreed to let you come over today." The air thickened, the fan's hum suddenly deafening in the charged silence. My heart hammered, and I realized my hands were trembling, not from the fan, but from the weight of her words. She had admitted something, yet hadn't completed the thought, leaving a jagged space between us that made every muscle in my body tense. "You what?" I asked, voice low, careful, though my chest ached with curiosity and longing. She leaned forward slightly, and the faint brush of her sleeve against my arm sent an electric shiver down my spine. I've been thinking about you," she said, eyes glinting with something I couldn't name. "More than I probably should." I stepped closer, instinctively, drawn in by her honesty, by the vulnerability that made her all the more irresistible. My fingers twitched near hers, itching to bridge the gap, but she shifted as well, so the distance remained just out of reach. Her hand brushed mine as she moved, a ghost of contact that left my skin tingling. This is dangerous, she murmured, voice trembling slightly, almost a whisper. You know it, don't you? I nodded, unable to speak, my gaze fixed on her. Every detail, the tilt of her head, the curve of her neck, the warmth radiating from her shoulder, pulled at something raw inside me. I wanted to close the space between us, to press closer, but the world outside this room and the fear of the impossible pressed against my ribs like an iron weight. Her breath hitched as she leaned forward, close enough that the air between us vibrated. I could see the pulse in her throat, the soft glimmer in her eyes, the way her lips parted just slightly. It was the most intimate, terrifying, irresistible moment I'd ever experienced. And then, without another word, she stood abruptly, a flash of decision in her amber eyes. I felt the faint brush of her hand against mine as she moved, close enough to burn, yet leaving the tension unresolved. My chest tightened, a mixture of fear and desire twisting through me. Stay, she whispered, barely audible, but it was enough to break the restraint I'd been holding. I didn't step back. I couldn't. Every instinct told me that the moment had shifted, that the rules had changed, and that the inevitable was closing in. And in that charged silence, with trembling hands and hearts racing, I realized we had crossed the threshold into something neither of us could undo. The room felt impossibly small, every shadow and corner shrinking around us as if the apartment itself had leaned in to watch. She was standing just a few feet away, and I could see the faint tremble in her hands, the subtle rise and fall of her chest. Every breath she took seemed to echo in my own lungs, drawing me closer, inch by inch. I can't. I don't know if I should, she whispered, eyes flicking to mine, searching, hesitating. I stepped forward, careful but unrelenting. Maybe we don't have to think about that, I murmured, voice low, trembling despite my effort to stay steady. Right now, it's just us. Her gaze softened, and for the first time, I saw all of her. The confidence, the vulnerability, the long-held regrets, the desire she hadn't allowed herself to name. I wanted to reach out, to close the remaining distance, but my hands hovered awkwardly, caught between daring and hesitation. She leaned slightly toward me, so close that the air between us vibrated with anticipation. I could see the faint glimmer in her eyes, the almost imperceptible bite of her lower lip. Her breath brushed against my cheek as she whispered, I've been waiting for this, maybe longer than I should have. A shiver ran through me at the admission, raw and human, fragile yet consuming. My fingers twitched against the space between us, finally daring to brush a strand of hair from her face. She didn't pull back. Instead, she tilted her head just slightly, inviting the touch, the closeness, the surrender that had been building for weeks. We were inches apart now, the room alive with every heartbeat, every tiny movement magnified. The faint warmth of her shoulder brushed against mine as she shifted closer, and I felt the pull of gravity I had been resisting, finally undeniable. Words failed. There was nothing left but the electric hum of proximity and the quiet understanding of everything we had been silently carrying. I don't want to step back, I admitted, voice barely more than a whisper. Her lips curved in the smallest, most fragile smile, tinged with relief, fear, and desire. Then don't, she whispered back. In that moment, all pretense and hesitation fell away. We didn't need explanations, apologies, or plans for the outside world. Every glance, every touch, every subtle movement spoke volumes. She leaned fully toward me, just far enough that our foreheads nearly touched, and I felt the quiet surrender in her posture. The same surrender I had been feeling, the one that left every nerve in my body alight. The tension that had been taut for so long finally eased, replaced by a profound clarity. We didn't need to rush, didn't need to define it with words. The attraction, the longing, the messy, human imperfection of it all, it was ours, undeniable and fully understood. We stayed there, suspended, inches apart, hearts racing, the world outside forgotten. And in that quiet, fragile closeness, I realized we had finally crossed the line we'd both feared but secretly longed for. The apartment was quiet now, the fan's soft hum the only sound. We didn't move immediately, both of us suspended in the aftermath of what had finally happened, the slow unraveling of weeks of tension, longing, and hesitation. She leaned against me, her head resting lightly on my shoulder. I could feel the warmth of her, steady and grounding, the subtle rise and fall of her breath against my chest. My arm curled around her, fingers brushing against hers until they intertwined, small but deliberate, a quiet claim without words. I was scared, she whispered, voice muffled against my collarbone. I didn't know if I should feel this way. I pressed my cheek gently to her hair. Me too, I admitted. But I'm glad we didn't step back. She smiled softly, tilting her head up just enough that our foreheads touched. It was intimate, not rushed, a shared acknowledgement of everything we had silently carried. The risk, the attraction, the messiness of it all. There was no need for perfection here, only presence, only the human warmth between us. I drew her closer, letting the quiet envelop us. Every lingering glance, every subtle brush of skin against skin, felt like a small victory over the doubts that had kept us both hesitant. We didn't need words. The tension that had defined our past interactions had softened into something steady, palpable, and real. We sat together on the couch, her hand resting over mine, fingers sliding into the spaces they had longed to find. The apartment, once a place of mundane tasks and awkward tension, now felt like ours, intimate, safe, and full of possibility. I never imagined, she started, then paused, letting the thought drift. This thus could feel like this. I squeezed her hand gently. It's messy, yeah? But it feels right. She leaned against me fully, closing the last fraction of space, and I could feel the small sigh of relief escape her lips. We stayed like that, suspended in the quiet intimacy, until the city outside reminded us that life continued beyond the apartment walls. But for now, it didn't matter. We had this presence, closeness, acceptance. And for the first time, it felt enough. As we settled into that warmth, I realized that the age gap, the hesitation, the outside judgment, it didn't matter here. Not when every touch, every glance, every small gesture said exactly what words could not. And in that quiet, fully human, fully alive moment, we finally understood each other. Did you enjoy the story? What kind of stories would you like to hear next?